So many times in life, we are waiting for a sign, waiting for a signal, looking for direction for our purpose. And yet then, when it happens, it's so easy to disregard the way that the touch of the divine, the way that the flow of the universe may come. And this happened to me. When I had first come to Rishikesh after having this sacred and amazing experience on the banks of Mother Ganga, I was walking through the ashram. I had discovered this beautiful ashram as a beautiful pathway to get from the banks of Ganga to the hotel that we were staying at. And one day, as I was walking through the ashram, that voice of the divine spoke. And of course, I tried to pretend it was all in my imagination. So here in the spot where that happened, on this pathway, I'm going to share with you this chapter from Hollywood to the Himalayas, chapter 7, titled, You Must Stay. Parmarth Niketan ashram became my pathway between the hotel and the banks of Ganga, a walk I took several times a day, rushing out of the hotel early each morning and inevitably having to return to use the restroom at least a few times before Jim came to get me after sunset. One day, as I walked through the ashram, I heard a clear, stable voice, a man's voice saying, "You must stay here." I looked around to see who had spoken, but the pathway was empty. I looked up, but there was no one on any of the balconies above. If the voice had come from the central gardens, it would have had to be a shout, not the gentle voice I had just heard. No one had spoken. If no one was around, there couldn't have been a voice, I reasoned. I must have imagined it. So I kept walking. 30 seconds later, I heard it again. A soft, calm, male voice, as though spoken by a gentleman in the seat next to me on an airplane or a train. You must stay here. Again, I looked. And again, the pathway and balconies were still empty. Meditative though I had become, I was sure that I hadn't lost my common sense. Clearly, if there was a voice, there had to be a speaker. If there was no speaker, it meant there was no voice. The only people who heard voices were schizophrenics and Joan of Arc. My experiences since I had first laid eyes on Ganga had been expansive and whole, not the fragmentation of schizophrenia. I was not delusional. Yet, if I wasn't delusional, and I wasn't Joan of Arc, who had spoken? No one was there, so no one had spoken. I could not have heard a voice. Then I heard another voice, recognizably my own. It said, speaking in that authoritative, commanding second person to which I had become accustomed, "Okay, you can ignore that voice, but you are about to ignore a very strong sign. You are about to pretend that you didn't hear a voice just because it doesn't make sense. You're free to do that, but it is a violation of the vow you took on the airplane to keep your heart open. You promised that you would keep your heart open to any signs of why you came to India. You promised that if you couldn't keep your heart open, you would leave." The internal reproach continued. So, if you are going to pretend that you didn't hear a voice, you must go back to Delhi and get on a flight home to San Francisco. You cannot break your own vow. I was not in the mood to navigate a return trip to Delhi or to leave India quite yet. Along with the ecstasy, I was fighting a cold. I had, therefore, only one choice. Conceding to my own ultimatum, I walked off the central pathway and onto a smaller pathway in the Parmarth Niketan ashram toward a large sign with office painted on it in English. Now the signs say reception. At that time they said office. I would like to stay here, I told the man behind the counter. He and 3 other gentlemen sat cross-legged on a thin mattress behind a low wooden desk. He did not respond. He just looked at me. Excuse me, I would like to please stay here, I repeated, slower and louder, careful to enunciate my words. Is it possible? Can I stay here? How much does it cost? And to hear the rest of it, you can read the rest in the rest of this chapter or wait for our next video. But I love this particular story because this is how it all happened for me. This ashram was just a pathway from Ganga to the hotel. And yet, on that path, I heard this voice that I first ignored, heard it again, was about to ignore it again. If I had ignored that voice, I wouldn't be here today. And so as we look for the directions, for the path, for the sign, for the signal from the divine, be careful to make sure that your ears are really open and that when you hear something, don't disregard it so quickly, just because it may not make sense. I was a scientist, not a mystic, not someone who heard voices. And yet, that voice, and listening to it, and following it, led me to where I am today. So I'm so enjoying sharing these chapters of Hollywood to the Himalayas with you as we actually stand in the places here at Parmarth Niketan, on the banks of Ganga, in Rishikesh, where all of the different chapters happened. So stay tuned for the next video for another chapter on another location. And for those of you who haven't yet read Hollywood to the Himalayas, I really look forward to your thoughts and your responses of how, through this book, how my journey, my experiences are helping you to find healing and transformation and freedom in your own life. So much love to you all from these banks of Mother Ganga, from this lap of the sacred Himalayas.